Content warning. Please be advised, this story contains descriptions of violence, some of which is directed against minors, along with gore, death, and heavy religious themes. Listener discretion is advised. Your first kill had been an act of mercy. It had been one of your own that you put to the blade, and it had been selfish. You were barely a novice at the time, not yet fit for war, but war came to you instead, in the form of an assault on the Skole itself. In the dead of night, they struck like phantoms, lithe, graceful figures, clad in form-fitting armor that mimicked the shadows, gliding silently through the barracks. Their helmets were smooth and expressionless, betraying no hint of the beings within. With fluid, precise motions, they drew blades that shimmered with an otherworldly sheen, the alien metal not so much as whispering from their sheaths. The Eldar moved from bunk to bunk with inhuman speed and efficiency. Silver flashes rent the air, followed by wet gurgles and choked gasps that faded all too quickly into eerie silence. They cut down the slumbering progenitor with calculated, remorseless ease, extinguishing young lives like spent candles. You don't know why you awoke when you did, but it was just in time to glimpse the uncannily tall, armored beings a few rows down, making quick work of each row, bunk by bunk. You were paralyzed with fear. If you tried to run, they would surely see you. If you remained where you lay, death was imminent. You could never admit it to your priests or drill abbots, but you feared death. You never stopped fearing death. Another person awoke to the chaos, and their shriek echoed through the tense silence. The Eldar warriors momentarily froze, their attention shifting toward the sound. Suddenly, as if in an airlock, the victim's screams were silenced by the swift blade of a Xenos sword. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then, the entire barracks of progenitor erupted from their beds in a frenzied panic, some still half asleep, others weeping and wailing in abject terror. You scrambled from your bunk and dove underneath the bed frames, pressing your small body as far into the shadows as possible. The Eldar blades flashed and whirled with blurring speed, scything through the fleeing children like a reaper through ripe wheat, driven by an even greater urgency to complete their grim work before the alarm could truly be raised. Squeezing your eyes shut, you willed yourself to wake up, praying to the Emperor that this was all some horrific nightmare. But the screams, the wet thud of small bodies hitting the floor, and the coppery stench of spilled blood, it was all too real. Peering out from your meager refuge, your tear-blurred gaze fell upon a fellow novice. She lay crumpled beside your bunk, one hand clutching the ugly wound in her belly, her life's blood pumping out between her small fingers. Her wide, frightened eyes found yours, and she extended a trembling, crimson-stained hand toward you.
Help me, please.
You hesitated, torn between the urge to comfort the dying girl and the fear that her pleading might alert the Elder to your presence. Then, your fingers brushed the hilt of the utility knife your favorite drill abbess had given you, the one you always kept close. She was dying, suffering. You knew what you had to do. Crawling out just far enough to reach her, you averted your gaze from her eyes. Murmuring a fragmented prayer for forgiveness, you took her head in one hand and, mustering all the strength you could in your tiny body, dragged the knife across her throat. Hot blood seeped over your fingers, and the novice's chest gave a final, gurgling breath.
I'm sorry,
you whispered hoarsely, squeezing the girl's hand until she was completely still.
Emperor, forgive me. I'm so sorry.
Fighting down the urge to vomit, you withdrew beneath the bunk, the girl's blood cooling and sticky on your hands. You had taken your first life, not in a glorious battle against the enemies of mankind, but in a mercy killing of one of your own. The weight of that knowledge settled like a stone in your chest, even as the slaughter raged on around you. You didn't even know her name. You huddled there in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe, praying to the Emperor that the Xenos would not find you. But your prayers went unanswered. An armored hand seized the bed frame from above you and flung it aside as if it weighed nothing, exposing your hiding place. You looked up to see a towering figure in sleek, segmented armor, its expressionless helm with slanted eye lenses regarding you dispassionately. A long, curved sword dripped with blood in its claw-like grip, and you knew with absolute certainty that your end had come. Trembling, you met that pitiless gaze, silently commending your soul to the Emperor. Would your death be quick, or would the xenoid monster make you suffer? Had you lived a life honourable enough to earn a place by the Emperor's side? You'd had so little time to prove yourself. You swallowed hard, tasting bile at the back of your throat. The Eldar warrior stared down at you, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. You could see your own terrified face reflected in the strange, mirrored lenses of its helm. You looked like a feral, frightened little beast, covered in the blood of your dead littermates. As minutes passed like hours, you began to wonder why the alien had not ended your life yet. Were they toying with you, waiting for some twisted form of entertainment? You had heard stories of the Eldar doing just that. Just when you thought you couldn't take it any longer, the Xenos turned away, its graceful movements betraying no hint of hesitation or uncertainty. With one final glance over its shoulder, it disappeared into the shadows, leaving you trembling and bewildered in its wake. You blinked stupidly, unable to process what was happening. Reality shattered into a million pieces, defying every truth you had ever known or been taught to believe. In one fleeting moment, everything changed, leaving you stranded in a new and terrifying world, surrounded by the dead and dying. There was no time to ponder the warrior's inscrutable motives. It was already gone, its armor somehow melting into the flickering shadows, defying even more of your fragile, broken reality. You remained where you were, too stunned to move, barely able to breathe around the hammering of your heart. It pounded so loudly that you nearly missed the room flooding with guardsmen, flanking veteran battle sisters as they poured through the doorway into a scene that would haunt all who looked upon it for years to come. But it was over. You were alive. Yet, as you knelt among the cooling bodies of your fellow progenitor, you couldn't shake the feeling that some fundamental part of you had died with them. You were taken with the other survivors and treated by the Hospitallers, sisters of the order that would one day become your own. For days after, you were haunted by nightmares of those fresh horrors, the screams of your comrades, the cold-blooded efficiency of the Eldar warriors' attacks, and most hauntingly of all, the memory of taking a life yourself. Amidst the chaos and confusion that followed the raid, you were questioned repeatedly by Inquisition agents, Adeptus Arbites officers, and battle sisters alike. Nearly every detail of your experience was pried from you, every nuance analysed and scrutinised. You did your best to answer without crying, telling them everything, including giving the dying novice the Emperor's mercy, as you learned to call it. It had been a small comfort to be told you had done the right thing, but it did nothing to quell the disgust in your heart. Yet, through all the questioning and scrutiny, you kept one detail from your testimony, the Eldar who spared you. The why and how would forever remain a mystery, for you feared what it might mean to the Inquisition, and you couldn't possibly reveal it to the other girls who had also survived the massacre. What would they think of you? The weight of your first secret was a heavy burden you had to bear alone. Despite this, it posed no hindrance to the camaraderie you all formed together. In the aftermath, with each passing day, week, and exhausting month, you clung to these bonds like a lifeline. The other survivors became your sisters in every way that mattered, bound by shared trauma, a silent scar etched deep in your collective souls. They were more than just your sisters, more than just comrades in battle. You shared a bond so powerful it could withstand any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable. In your heart, you knew that nothing could ever come between you, not even death itself. What a cruel thing it is now that, when you think of your sisters, you can only lament that they had not died with the rest of the progenitor on that dreadful night. When the memories of your first kill echo in your mind's eye and haunt your dreams, which one of your sister's faces do you dream of in her place? The Bones We Bury, an Adeptus Sororitas story. Created by Ray Berry, voiced by Claire Glover, and inspired by the creative works of Luetin 09. Chapter 2, Adelais. Kill Team 9 made their way back to the convent from yet another early morning grave run, a name the girls had not so affectionately dubbed it behind Sister Charity's back. Trying not to drag her feet, Adelais sent a humble, tired prayer to the Emperor that her aching heels would callous up sooner rather than later. She was unsure how many more blisters she could endure before begging Luetin's tech priests to replace her feet with augments. More of the city's residents had risen to clog the streets, making the return trip from the catacombs even more stifling than the journey there. Bodies, voices, and odors all competed to overpower the incense as processions of pilgrims and priests parted the crowd. As if the Emperor had touched her thoughts, Adelais caught a new scent. It was incense, but not one she immediately recognized. Its sweet musk hung heavily in the air, overpowering everything else. Lost in contemplation, Adelais didn't realize how distracted she'd become until she smashed into Sister Charity's armored bag, the power pack taking the brunt of the impact.
Ow!
Adelais gasped reflexively, then sucked in a breath, straightening to attention.
Forgive me, Sister Superior.
Charity raised her gauntleted hand to silence Adelais, her attention fixed on the crowd as if searching or listening. Tension radiated from her as she scrutinized the bustling people. After a long pause, the novitiates began to shift where they stood, exchanging hesitant glances. Adelais shrugged at the line of girls, just as confused as they were, before turning back to the novitiate superior, who remained as still as a statue.
Sister...
Hold. Charity's tone was sharp, but not unkind. Something was wrong. A burst of static cut through the ambient crowd, coming from Charity's vox speed, followed by a muffled communication that Adelais could not decipher, no matter how close she was to the battle sister. Adelais barely had time to glance back at the nearest novitiate, a visibly agitated Nilestra, before Charity turned to the kill team, drawing the bolt pistol, maglock to her thigh. Charity's slate eyes scanned the girls before she drew in a breath, and, with a note of exasperation, addressed them over the crowd. Any of you girls ever heard of the term trial by fire? Ebony and Maury raised their hands, and after a brief delay, so did Nilestra, though Adelais had her doubts about that one. Charity flashed a similar look at the red-headed novitiate, but clearly there was no time to question her. Very well, Charity continued. Kill Team 4 is engaged in a fight-turned-riot in Sector 15. Sister Cornelia has called for any available forces to assist in quelling the masses. Adelai's stomach dropped. Who are the suspected perpetrators? Ebony said from behind Adelais. Charity's lips thinned. It's not part of your orders to know that at this time, Novitiate Sola. And that goes for any further questions before we can assess the situation. Understood?
Yes, Sister Superior.
The kill team chimed in perfect unison, following their superior off their usual route and through the crowd, which parted without the need for so much as a whistle to alert them. Finally, Nilestra muttered under her breath, barely able to contain her excitement. A proper battle to put this dogged training to use. Adelais heard Maury and Lillian exchange a few unintelligible words before they both began to sing a hymn to the pace of their hurried march. It was a simple one that nearly every sister, from the youngest novice to the Abbess Sanctorum herself, knew by heart. The girls' soprano notes cut through the low murmur of city noise, and the crowd parted even faster for the en route sisters. Further back in the line, Silverstein joined in, offering a strong contralto to the harmony, a song that would have taken Adelai's breath away had she not already been struggling to keep pace with Sister Charity. It did not take long to notice the change in foot traffic, the disturbance in the flow of human bodies. Were it not for the hymn declaring their arrival, Charity might have bowled over many of the panicked denizens in the sector. Instead of the usual smells of sweat and oil, the air was thick with a smoky odor of burning fabric and flesh. The kill team came upon a street in utter chaos. A crowd of flying fists and improvised weapons had gathered near the steps of the Church of St. Raval. One of its stained glass windows was shattered, and smoke wafted from the broken opening. The holy structure loomed over the violence as if bearing witness to the madness that bled onto its very steps. Voices bellowed over the roar of the fight.
We will not be silent! Cleanse the unfaithful! Death to the false prophet!
Adelais caught flashes of silver skeletons embroidered into the black robes of Kill Team 4 as the novitiates moved through the crowd. Some were pulling the vulnerable to safety, while others were actively combating aggressors. There were simply too many civilians for one kill team to handle, and still no sign of the RBTs.
Pair up! Reinforce your sisters!
Charity ordered, her voice cutting through the cacophony of violence.
Yes, Sister Superior!
The novitiates echoed in a chorus of zeal and determination. Auto pistols at the ready, they broke off from each other in predetermined pairs, the youngest of them with Charity herself. Adelais and Nilestra exchanged a quick look before swiftly moving toward the church steps, where a lone novitiate was fending off a frenzy of rioters. Sporadic pops of gunfire sounded above the screams of participants and bystanders. Adelais and Nilestra skirted around the bulk of the crowd until they had no choice but to push through it. Adelais fired a single warning shot over the rioters' heads.
In the name of our God Emperor, stand aside!
From somewhere in the crowd, more youthful voices joined Lillian, Silverstein, and Maury in song. For a moment, it seemed the blessed hymn was restoring some sensibility to the civilians, as a few tore themselves away from the fight to flee. Keeping a practiced finger flat against the trigger guard, Adelais followed close behind Nilestra, who had taken point and was more than willing to encourage rioters out of their way with the butt of her pistol and her fists. For some of the unruly participants, a single glance down the barrel of Adelai's gun was enough to deter them. But as they grew closer to their fellow novitiate in distress, it became clear that not all were willing to heed the authority of the Ecclesiarchy, much less from lower-ranking aspirants such as they.
Foolish children! You defend the interloper!
Horror struck Adelais as she watched a robed man swing a blunt metal pipe through the air. With a sickening crack, it collided with the lone novitiate's head, sending the girl's entire body spinning in midair. Adelais caught a glimpse of her vacant, glassy eyes before she dropped like a stone, disappearing beneath a sea of bodies. She acted without thinking, racing toward her fallen sister. The surrounding chaos was a choir of shouts and screams, a cacophony that drowned out her thoughts. The stricken novitiate lay disturbingly still, sprawled across the steps, her limbs tangled in a heap, her head twisted too far in one direction. Dead. Just like that, she was dead, probably before she'd even hit the ground. Adelai's stomach turned as she only now recognized her. Sister Liana. They had been in the same division, and they'd graduated together. They were the same age. The dead girl's pistol clattered down the steps as her killer lunged to exchange his pipe for firepower. With no time to think, Adelais raised her auto pistol and squeezed the trigger, firing 3 slugs in rapid succession into the man's chest. The heretic dropped. A wave of something unseen prickled over Adelai's skin, both hot and cold. Her stomach churned, and her mouth filled with bitter saliva. She'd never killed anyone before. But there was no time to dwell on it, no time to let her constitution fail. Swallowing the wave of nausea, she noticed a shadow looming over her. She lifted her gaze just in time to catch the wicked glint of a blade, and instinct kicked in. She rolled, the corner of the church steps digging into her leather armor. The blade rang against the stone, narrowly missing her face. Still on her back, Adelais fired upward, the auto pistol barking loudly as bullets ripped toward her attacker. One struck true, embedding in the man's shoulder, but he kept coming, his eyes wild with fury, and kicked the pistol from Adelai's hand. She scrambled to her feet and ducked behind a nearby pillar as he lunged, his sword slashing through empty space. Her breath quickened as she spotted a heavy iron chain hanging loose from the wall, its smoldering sensor missing. Grabbing it with both hands, she swung it like a whip, catching her attacker across the face and sending him stumbling back. The force knocked him off balance, and for a fleeting moment, Adelais saw an opening.
Nil!
She cried out to her battle partner, who charged forward to rejoin her. With unspoken understanding, Nilestra lunged with her whole body, tackling the heretic to the ground. The two wrestled fiercely, grappling for control as he snarled in rage. With a swift, violent jab, she drove her fist into his gut, forcing the air from his lungs. In retaliation, the heretic's free hand shot out and caught Nilestra's veil, wrenching it nearly off her head, throwing her off him in the process. Nilestra stumbled back, her veil hanging askew as she fought to regain her balance. The heretic scrambled to his feet, blade in hand, his face contorted with manic rage. But Adelais was ready. She swung the iron chain again, this time wrapping it around the man's sword arm. With a sharp tug, she wrenched him off balance, sending him crashing into the pillar, trapped with a chain pulled taut. Nilestra pounced like a frenzied beast, pinning the thrashing heretic as she tried to wrestle the blade from his grip.
Filthy wretch!
She snarled, slamming her fist into his face with a nasty crunch. Blood spurted from his broken nose, splattering across Nilestra's knuckles. She tore the weapon from his hand, gripping it as her own, and swung it with all her might. It wasn't swift, it wasn't clean, and it was anything but merciful. Nilestra hacked and hacked until the heretic stopped fighting, stopped screaming, and finally, stopped moving. By then, his head was little more than a bloody mass of gore and bone fragments, with tendons and sinew the last to give way. It was only when Adelais released the chain that the nearly headless corpse collapsed in a wet heap at the base of the column. Nilestra shuddered violently, her entire body racked by the aftermath of the fight for her life. The heretic's blood coated her hands and forearms, her wide green eyes stark against the smudgy black pits of her sockets. She raised her tear-filled gaze to meet Adelais. The fire in them had faded, replaced by anguish and desperation. But there was no time for such feelings.
Defend the church! Rally any sister you can to our side!
Adelais cried, her throat dry and tight with unfulfilled grief. Nilestra drew in a breath, readjusted her grip on the heretic's blade, and turned back toward the bulk of the riot. Adelais caught brief glimpses of Kill Team 9's members, scattered in pairs throughout the crowd. Phoebe covered Silverstein as the aspiring hospitaller dragged a fallen novitiate away from the heart of the violence. Stelia and Cassandra were in the thick of it, back to back with the third novitiate, as they repelled aggressors with guns and blades. Adelais had no time to locate the rest of her kill team, as more robed civilians surged up the stairs, showing little to no regard for their own survival.
Disperse in the name of the Emperor!
Adelais bellowed. Each pull of the trigger numbed her queasiness, drowning it in the harsh reality of battle. The only sound she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears. Beside her, Nilestra slammed her head into the face of a near-rabid civilian, before relieving the woman of a sword that had clearly been taken from the Bone Keepers.
This is not yours to wield!
Nilestra ended her fierce declaration with a kick to the woman's center. The heretic's head snapped back as her body flew through the air, blood spurting from her nose like the tail of a sanguine comet. More blood spattered the steps as her skull hit the stone with a violent crack, and then she went still. Nilestra gripped the blood-slick sword in her free hand, now wielding two gleaming blades. Teeth gritted in a snarl, she followed the body down the steps, engaging the nearest heretic who dared desecrate the holy ground beneath them. Adelais gritted her teeth. They couldn't keep this up forever. They needed reinforcements, and fast. Amidst the frenzy, she spotted Sister Charity in the crowd, her back to the church. Charity had a fistful of someone's robes in her ceramite grip, while driving her other fist, once, twice, into their face. The noise was so overwhelming that Adelais nearly missed the inexplicable pop in her ears, as if her skull were an embarking deck depressurizing in the void of space. Then, Charity dropped the body, spun on her heels, lifted the bolt pistol Adelais hadn't even noticed her draw, and pointed it directly at her. Her heart stopped, her mind racing for a logical answer. The deafening bang of the bolt pistol tore through the air, and Adelais felt, more than heard the shot, as the explosive round clipped the edge of her veil, narrowly missing her. A sudden, heavy wetness hit the back of her head. She turned just in time to see a headless body drop, the rusty blade in its hand clattering down the stairs. By the time she registered what had happened and looked back for her superior, Charity was already shoving her way through the crowd with purpose. She lunged, tackling another body to the ground at a startled Maury's feet. But there was no time to linger, no time to hesitate, no time to do anything but fight. The crowd continued to press in, rabid and heedless of the mounting casualties, like an army of insects. Adelais caught a glimpse of Nilestra driving one of her captured swords through a robed man's chest before ripping it free in a spray of crimson. The novitiate's face was a mask of righteous fury. A scream pierced the air nearby. Adelais whipped her head around to see a novitiate fall, a crude axe buried in her shoulder. The girl collapsed, and two more novitiates closed ranks around their fallen sister to drive the attackers back, but they were being overrun.
Hold them back!
Adelais roared, surging toward the breach in their defenses. She slammed her pistol into a wild-eyed man's face, feeling bones crunch. Then she was standing over the wounded novitiate, firing point-blank into the mob. Solid slugs tore through flesh and bone in gory bursts. Suddenly, an amplified voice boomed across the square, momentarily drowning out the clamor of battle.
In the name of the God Emperor and the Holy Adeptus Arbites, cease this disorder at once. Lay down your weapons and submit to imperial justice.
Adelai's head snapped up. A phalanx of black-armored Arbites marched into the square, their shock mauls and suppression shields at the ready. At their center strode a veteran proctor, the skull visage upon his helm adding to his severe countenance. The rioters closest to the Arbites faltered. Some even began to comply, discarding their improvised weapons and sinking to their knees, or fleeing in fear of retribution. The more maddened rioters lunged to attack, but they were met with crackling power mauls and point-blank shotgun blasts. The The Arbites advanced with merciless precision, their heavy boots tramping over the gritty ferrocrate in perfect unison. Adelais felt a rush of relief so potent, it was almost like a physical blow. Panting, her auto-pistol still smoking from recent use, she surveyed the shifting battlefield. The Arbites cut through the chaotic melee with brutal precision, a stark contrast to the desperate struggle that had defined their side moments before. Nilestra staggered over, the holy sword dripping crimson at her side, while the blade she'd taken from the heretic lay discarded in her wake. Her eyes blazed with lingering fury. "Emperor be praised! The Arbites decided to show up," she groaned, spitting a glob of blood-flecked saliva onto a brown-robed corpse beneath her boot. Adelais could only nod numbly, the adrenaline still singing through her veins. Her eyes swept down to the wounded novitiate lying at her feet, surrounded by her battle sisters, who were frantically trying to save her. The girl's face was drained of colour, but she refused to scream, her jaw clenched against what could only be excruciating pain. As the Arbites restored order with ruthless efficiency, Adelais allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. She glanced around, taking stock of the situation. The skirmish seemed to be over, with the last of the rioters either subdued or fleeing before the implacable advance of the Arbites. The stench of blood and sweat hung heavy in the air. The aftermath of the riot was a grim tableau of carnage and destruction. As the last echoes of violence faded, an eerie quiet settled over the blood-spattered square. The Arbites moved among the fallen with practiced efficiency, securing prisoners and checking for survivors. Everywhere she looked, Adelais saw reminders of their heavy losses. Novitiates either lying motionless, adding to the red-stained mosaic on the broken stone, or barely keeping upright as they leaned on each other for support amidst fresh grief. The once buzzing place had been transformed into a hauntingly silent ghost town, engulfed by a melancholic aura. Adelais realized she could have easily been among the dead, recalling how many times she'd narrowly avoided a sword, shiv, or club, each blow capable of inflicting irreparable damage, despite the woven reinforcement beneath each novitiate's veil. Adelai's heart dropped to her stomach. Such little protection had not done the other novitiates any good. It had done Sister Liana no good at all. She made her way over to where Kill Team 9 had regrouped, stepping around bodies and pools of congealing blood. Sweet little Maury's voice shook as she prayed over her fallen sister, while Stelia and Cassandra stood firm, despite their battered appearances. They guarded Lillian, who had made herself small on the steps, holding her face in a trembling hand, a nasty bruise swelling her left eye shut. "Where are Phoebe and Silverstein?" Adelais asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears.
"Here,"
came Phoebe's terse reply as she approached from behind, supporting a limping Silverstein. The aspiring hospitaler's face was pale and drawn with pain, but she managed a wan smile. "I'll survive." She winced, leaning on Phoebe for support. "Just a sprain, I think. Set me down by Sister Maria so I can take a look at her, please." Adelais nodded and stepped aside for the hospitaler in training, relief washing through her. They had survived, if only just, but the cost had been high, too high. Kill Team 4 had suffered greatly, and for what? Adelais wondered, her heart aching at the sight of the fallen. She turned to survey the scene once more, and her gaze fell on the shattered windows of the church. The sacred building looked forlorn, its sanctity violated by the madness that had unfolded on its very steps. Adelais felt a sudden, fierce surge of anger. Who would dare desecrate holy ground like this? What could drive someone to such senseless violence? The last bits of adrenaline seeped from Adelai's bones, and a sudden exhaustion took over. She dragged her feet up the steps toward where Nilestra sat at the edge of their regrouped kill team, who had turned her body away from the team and toward the battle-torn street. Her grip on her sword was so tight that the freckles on her skin stood out angrily against her pale, taut knuckles. Her face contorted with enraged anguish, contained only by her vice-like grip on the hilt. Adelais sank down beside Nilestra, wincing as her battered body protested the movement. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the Arbites continue their grim work of restoring order to the blood-soaked square. Medicaid personnel had also arrived, triaging the injured and preparing the most critical cases for immediate transport to the convent. Adelais numbly watched as a pair of hospitalers gently lifted the broken body of a fallen novitiate onto a stretcher, the once silvery embroidery now stained a vivid crimson. The sight made Adelai's heart ache, and she turned away, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Beside her, Nilestra let out a low, anguished sound, somewhere between a growl and a sob. Her grip on the sword tightened even further, and fresh blood beaded across her split knuckles. "Why?" Nilestra demanded answers that would never come, her voice thick with pain and confusion. "Why did this happen? What was the point of it all?" Adelais yearned for a divine whisper to guide her words and bring comfort to her sister, but nothing came. No eloquent phrases or reassuring sentiments that could ease their pain. The Emperor, as always, remained stoically silent, his will shrouded in mystery. Bruised, weak, and utterly exhausted, Adelais leaned over just enough to touch shoulders with Nilestra. Their bodies pressed together, finding solace and strength in each other's presence amidst the chaos and uncertainty. As Adelais and Nilestra sat in somber silence, raised voices carried across the blood-stained square. At first, Adelais paid them no mind, assuming it was merely the Arbites issuing orders or interrogating suspects. But as the voices grew louder and more heated, her attention was drawn to their source. Near the shattered steps of the church, two groups had gathered. One bore the distinctive crimson and gold livery of the Administratum, their elaborate headdresses and data slates marking them as high-ranking adepts. The other group wore the austere, heavy robes of the Ecclesiarchy, their silver aquillas glinting in the smoky light. At the center of each group stood a commanding figure. For the Administratum, a severe-looking woman with augmetic eyes, and for the Ecclesiarchy, a wizened priest whose voice crackled like vox static.
"This bloodshed lies squarely at the feet of your zealots, Archdeacon,"
the Administratum woman declared, jabbing an accusing finger.
"You neglect the responsibility you have to maintain your flock, and yet they run amok like wild beasts."
The priest's augmetic voice wheezed as he drew himself up to his full height.
"How dare you, Lady Magistrate? It is your draconian policies that have pushed these downtrodden faithful to desperation. I can hardly blame them for clinging to some messages over others when one feeds and the other starves. The increased tithes, the labor conscriptions, you leave them no recourse."
Recourse?
The magistrate scoffed.
Is that what you call this madness? Look around you, Archdeacon. Look at the bodies of the innocent, cut down by your precious faithful. This is heresy, plain and simple.
Heresy!
The priest's mechanical voice rose to a shriek.
You overstep yourself, bureaucrat. Only the Ecclesiarchy has the authority to name heresy. Your interference in matters of faith is deeply concerning.
As the argument escalated, more onlookers gathered. Adelais could see the fear and uncertainty on their faces, mirroring her own conflicted emotions. These were meant to be pillars of imperial authority, yet here they were, bickering like children while the city bled. Her heartbeat quickened as she feared another fight might break out. That was, until Sister Charity and Sister Cornelia of Kill Team 4 closed the distance between the bureaucrat and the priest. The tension was still thick as smoke, but it was clear that no one would dare instigate anything with the Adeptus Sororitas within arm's reach.
I have reports, Lady Magistrate. Reports of your adepts distributing weaponry to the gang responsible for this very riot. Explain that, if you can.
Baseless slander,
the magistrate retorted.
Besides, I know the congregation you attract, all loose of mind and filled with borderline blasphemous philosophies.
Nilestra stirred beside Adelais, her grip on the bloodied sword tightening once more.
Emperor's teeth. Is this truly what lies beneath the surface? While we bleed and die, they squabble.
Adelais could only nod grimly at Nilestra's words. As the argument between the Archdeacon and Magistrate reached a fevered pitch, Sister Charity finally stepped between them, her armoured bulk an imposing barrier. Behind her, Sister Cornelia stood like a statue, her entire body so rigid she could have been made of stone.
All right, that's enough!
Charity's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the quarrelling officials.
Have you no shame? No respect for the dead at your feet?
The Archdeacon sputtered indignantly.
You forget yourself, sister. This is a matter for the Ecclesiarchy and the Administratum to settle.
Adelais saw the moment Sister Cornelia snapped. She rounded on the priest, her eyes aflame.
Settle? You call this settling?
Sister Cornelia's voice shook with barely contained fury as she gestured at the carnage surrounding them.
While you two bicker like children, my novitiates lie dead and dying. They gave their lives to protect your flock, your people, and this is how you honor their sacrifice.
The Archdeacon flinched back as if struck, his augmetic voice box sputtering static. The magistrate, too, seemed to deflate under Cornelia's withering glare, her haughty demeanor crumbling. Sister Charity placed a restraining hand on Cornelia's shoulder, but her own voice was cold as the void when she addressed the officials.
The Adeptus Sororitas will be launching a full investigation into this incident. We will discover the truth behind this heresy, and Emperor help you both if we find you wanting.
With that, the sisters turned their backs on the chastened priest and bureaucrat, striding purposefully toward the church. At the same moment, the church doors creaked open with a heavy groan. A leathery, wrinkled face peered out, shrouded in weathered white robes that were well on their way to becoming rags. Her sunken eyes were wide and watery, and her voice was dry from the smoke.
Is it over?
With a fortifying breath, Adelais pulled herself to her feet and approached the old woman, her voice soft.
Yes, the threat has been contained, but I fear the damage is severe, both to the church and...
She trailed off, her gaze sweeping over the fallen novitiates as she fought to keep the tremble out of her voice.
And to our own.
The old woman looked first relieved, then physically pained by the news of their loss. She bowed her head and slipped back into the church. Adelais heard a muffled,
"It's over. We are saved,"
before the doors opened fully, allowing about a dozen similarly dressed pilgrims to trickle out into the daylight, led by what could only be their guide, their priest. He was dressed similarly, but in vestments clearly designed for the clergy. He was in rough shape, but seemed to have avoided most of the carnage, judging by the lack of bloodstains on his robes, once white with a touch of faded violet. His expression was gentle as he spoke to his followers, his gaze scanning over each of them. He had kind eyes that reminded Adelais of her favourite drill abbot from when she was just a young progenitor. Despite having fond memories of the man, Adelais hadn't thought of him in years, until now. The pilgrim priest stepped carefully through the debris and bodies strewn across the church steps, his well-sculpted face etched with sorrow. He approached Sister Charity and Sister Cornelia as they neared the top of the steps. With a weary sigh, he bowed his head in respect.
"Blessings of the Emperor upon you, sisters."
His voice was soft, like a warm embrace, a comforting and reassuring presence amidst the chaos and destruction. His eyes were filled with understanding, as if he could see the struggles and pain that Adelais carried as he briefly met her gaze. And his words, uttered with such calm conviction, were like a shield of divine protection against the horrors of the world.
"I am Father Vortum Frail, and this is my flock. Words cannot express the depth of our gratitude for your intervention. Had you and your brave novitiates not arrived when you did, I fear none of us would have survived this madness."
Sister Charity nodded solemnly to the pilgrim priest.
"Your thanks are appreciated, Father, but we merely performed our sacred duty. The Emperor protects, and we are his instruments."
The priest inclined his head, a sad smile playing on his lips.
"Indeed, sister, and yet the burden you bear is a heavy one."
He turned his kind gaze to Sister Cornelia.
"I see the grief in your eyes, the weight of the lives lost today."
At this, Charity's posture stiffened slightly at the priest's words. The servos in her armor hummed as she turned to survey the aftermath of the battle, her gaze lingering on the fallen novitiates. Then her stormy eyes found each and every one of her own girls. It was only then that Adelais realized their kill team had not suffered any losses. It felt like a miracle, given the carnage wrought upon these streets. When Charity flicked her gaze to Adelais, the novitiate suddenly felt very cold and very anxious.
"Were you targeted, Father?"
She spoke, then turned back to face the priest. His brow furrowed, a shadow passing over his face.
"I believe so, sister. Our pilgrimage had been peaceful until we arrived in this city. We came bearing a message of hope and unity, but it seems there are those who would twist our words and sow discord among the faithful."
Sister Cornelia's eyes narrowed. "What message do you speak of, exactly?" The priest hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully.
"We preach a simple truth, sister, that the Emperor's light shines within us all, regardless of station or birth. That, in his eyes, we are all equal, all worthy of his love and protection."
Adelais exchanged a glance with Ebony, who had joined her at her side. It sounded innocuous enough, even admirable, but something about it scratched at the back of her mind, like a half-remembered lesson from her scholar days. The Luetin Necropolis was full of people of every shape, size, and origin. Sister Charity's brow furrowed, her lips pursing into a thin line.
"A noble sentiment, Father, but one that could easily be misconstrued by those with less
pure intentions. The priest nodded solemnly.
I understand your concern, sister. Believe me, it weighs heavily on my heart. But surely the answer is not to hide from these truths, but to guide the faithful toward a proper understanding of them.
And who decides what is proper? Cornelia interjected sharply. The Ecclesiarchy? The Administratum? You? The priest spread his hands in a placating gesture.
The Emperor decides, sister. It is his will we must strive to discern and follow. Is it not?
An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. Adelais shifted uneasily, her mind racing. The priest's words rang true, even wise, but something about them unsettled her, like a splinter under her skin. She glanced at Ebony and saw a similar uncertainty in her eyes. Sister Charity finally broke the stillness. We will need to question you further, Father, to fully understand what happened here today.
Of course, sister.
The priest acquiesced readily.
I will cooperate in any way I can. All I ask is that my flock be allowed to seek shelter and solace. They have endured a great trauma.
Charity nodded curtly. Very well, but they are not to leave the necropolis. The priest's lips thinned, and he swallowed thickly before bowing his head.
And the ones who perpetrated this act of terror?
Sister Cornelia's expression hardened. They will face the Emperor's justice. The Adeptus Sororitas will conduct a thorough investigation, and the guilty will be punished for their crimes. The priest nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes.
I see. May the Emperor guide your hand, then.
Something flickered across Charity's features as well, so quick that Adelais could have blinked and missed it. Was it pity? Empathy? Surely not. Charity turned to address Adelais and the other novitiates. Escort the pilgrims to the convent for now. See that they are given food, water, and a place to rest, but do not let them out of your sight.
Yes, Sister Superior.
As the girls gathered the shaken but grateful pilgrims, out of the corner of her eye, Adelais caught Sister Cornelia pulling the other superior away from the novitiates. Not far enough for Adelai's keen ears, as she learned upon hearing Cornelia's clipped words. You can't be serious, Charity, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. You mean to keep them here, under our watch? Charity's expression remained impassive. It is a necessary precaution, Cornelia. We cannot risk them slipping away before we've had a chance to fully question them. It will set a bad precedent. Charity's gaze hardened. I invite any sister among our ranks to explain why vigilance is a bad precedent, even with those who claim to be our allies. Cornelia's face was stony as she retorted, Vigilance is one thing, Charity. Blind distrust is another. Charity regarded her with a cold stare. Your stubbornness and grief are clouding your judgment, Cornelia. And your arrogance is clouding yours, Cornelia snapped back, her voice like shards of ice. For one brought in from off-planet, you act as though you were raised on these very streets. Anger sparked in Charity's eyes for a brief moment, before her features resumed their steely calm. I may not be from here, Cornelia, she said, her tone edged with bitterness. But I am of here, of the faith and the mission that binds us all. That gives me as much right to act for the good of our sisterhood as you. How could you possibly understand what is good for the Bone Keepers? Cornelia said through her teeth, leaning in close to meet Charity's gaze. Tell me, whatever became of your old order? Charity bristled visibly at the jab, her fists clenching by her sides, lips thinning into a tight, tense line. She turned away from Sister Cornelia, forsaking the conversation for her novitiates. She met Adelai's gaze again, but her eyes were void of fire or resolve. They were dull and empty, able to repel the novitiate's curious gaze away from her all the same, but not before Adelais caught the low, rough answer her superior gave. An order of one is no longer an order at all. It was late in the afternoon by the time Adelais and her sisters had entrusted the pilgrims to the care of the convent's acolytes for food and shelter. Afterward, once within the safety of their kill team's barracks, the novitiates scattered like autumn leaves in the wind, each finding their own space to succumb to weariness. Their bodies sagged with fatigue, their spirits burdened by grief over the 3 fallen sisters who met brutal fates that day. It could have been any one of them. Some novitiates confronted their sorrow in silence, staring vacantly at the cold stone walls as if searching for answers hidden within their depths. Others murmured prayers under their breath, their voices barely rising above the groaning of machines coughing out semi-heated air in a futile attempt to warm the convent's cold walls. They prayed not only for their fallen sisters, but also for themselves, for strength, courage, survival. Adelais found solace near the window, aches radiating through her weary body after the day's harrowing events. Around her, fellow sisters exhibited varying degrees of shock and mourning. Nelestra sat alone on her bed, her gaze unfocused, while Lillian wept softly, her small form trembling with each muffled sob as Maury wrapped a comforting arm around their youngest member. Adelai's mind whirled with tumultuous thoughts and emotions. The pilgrim priest's words echoed in her head, messages of unity and equality that felt strikingly too good. Her musings were interrupted by Silverstein's approach, favoring her left side. Pain was etched into every line of her face, but a sober clarity shone in her eyes. She settled beside Adelais with a soft grunt. "How are you holding up?" Silverstein asked gently, her healer's gaze appraising Adelais as if detecting wounds beneath the skin, wounds no counterseptic or morphlox could mend. Adelais shrugged, wincing as sore muscles protested the movement. "As well as can be expected. It's just overwhelming." Silverstein nodded knowingly, understanding flickered in her eyes. "It always is after witnessing true combat. Real death changes you in ways difficult to grasp at first." Adelais swallowed hard, pressure tightened around her throat. "I killed today, Sylvie. I took lives, heretics who would have slain us all without hesitation. But still..." "You did what was necessary," Silverstein replied firmly, laying a reassuring hand on Adelai's shoulder. "Never question that. In battle, hesitation is death itself. You acted as the Emperor commanded, as any true sister would." Adelais nodded slowly, drawing strength from Silverstein's unwavering conviction, then glanced over at Nelestra, who remained apart from the others, fury barely contained on her face. "I'm worried about Nell," Adelais confided softly. "She seems lost, adrift in her anger." Silverstein followed Adelai's concerned gaze to Nelestra. The red-haired novitiate sat rigidly on the edge of her bunk, knuckles white as she gripped the mattress, her jaw clenched so tightly it was a wonder her teeth didn't crack. Her green eyes blazed with barely contained rage, like a wildfire seeking to consume everything in its path. "Anger can be a powerful weapon," Silverstein mused softly, "but it can also destroy the one who wields it if they're not careful." She sighed, shaking her head. "Nell has always had a temper, but this is different. It's not something she should handle alone. We're a team. None of us face this by ourselves." Adelais nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. She had seen glimpses of Nelestra's fury during the battle, the way she hacked and slashed with a savagery that bordered on madness. It was as if something had snapped inside her, unleashing a beast that had been caged for far too long. For a long moment, Adelais wondered if she should go to her, talk to her, but her own mind was so clouded with exhaustion and pain, she found no clarity with which to act. Instead, she watched as Cassandra rose from where she'd been sitting with Phoebe and padded over to Nelestra's bed. "Nell, are you all right?" Nelestra's head snapped up at Cassandra's tentative query, her eyes narrowing. For a tense moment, she simply stared at her fellow novitiate, her expression unreadable. Then, with a harsh bark of laughter that held no mirth, she spat.
"Am I all right? Emperor's blood, what kind of question is that?"
Cassandra flinched but held her ground.
I know today was hard. For all of us. I thought maybe you'd want to talk about it."
"Talk?"
Nelestra scoffed, her lip curling in a sneer.
"What good will talking do? Will it bring back our fallen sisters? Like Sister Liana? Will it shed any light on why this all happened?"
Adelais exchanged a worried glance with Silverstein. The battle had clearly shaken their sister to her core. With a grunt of pain, Silverstein pushed herself to her feet and limped over to Nelestra's bunk. Gently but firmly, she placed a hand on the other novitiate's shoulder. "Listen to me, Nell." Silverstein's voice was low, but intense. "What you're feeling right now, The anger, the doubt, the guilt. It's normal. We've all felt it. But you can't let it consume you. You can't lose faith. We're all going to miss Liana and Gwen and... She paused, her voice faltering for the first time. And Maria. Nilestra scoffed dryly, refusing to meet their healer's gentle gaze. You don't have to look at me to listen, so I'm going to keep talking. Silverstein continued, a maternal vigor returning to her voice. They may be your first, but they're not going to be your last. And one day they will all be at the Golden Throne, watching to see what you do to avenge their sacrifice. Adelais admired Silverstein's empathy and wisdom, but a small, shameful part of her envied it. Watching her now, seeing the trust and respect that shone in the eyes of the other novitiates as they turned to their eldest, Adelais couldn't help but feel a flicker of inadequacy. For all her efforts, she knew she lacked Silverstein's intuitive understanding of the human spirit, that healer's touch that could soothe even the rawest of wounds. It had taken little time in her company to see that Silverstein had a way of making each novitiate feel seen, heard and valued. Whether it was coaxing a rare smile from dour Phoebe with a wry joke, patiently helping Lillian master a difficult prayer, or now, gently leading Nilestra back from the precipice of her rage, Silverstein always seemed to know exactly what was needed. In comparison, Adelai's attempts at connecting with her sisters often felt clumsy and insufficient, like a blunt weapon attempting to perform the delicate work of a surgeon's scalpel. She could inspire them to feats of bravery and endurance in training, and now on the battlefield. But in these quiet moments of vulnerability and doubt, she floundered, unsure how to navigate the complex landscape of emotions. Adelais knew these thoughts were unworthy of her, that envy had no place in the hearts of the Emperor's chosen. Silverstein was her sister and friend, not some rival to be outshone. They each had their roles to play, their unique strengths to contribute to the cohesion of the kill team. For a long, tense moment, Nilestra stared at Silverstein, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, the hard lines of her face softened and her shoulders slumped, as though a great weight had settled upon them. I don't know if I can do this, Sylvie, she whispered brokenly. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Silverstein sat beside Nilestra and took her hand, squeezing it gently. None of us are strong enough alone, Nil. That's why the Emperor gave us each other, to lean on when our own strength fails. Nilestra drew a shuddering breath and nodded, blinking back the tears that had gathered in her eyes. Around them, the other novitiates had fallen silent, watching the exchange with solemn understanding. Silverstein looked around at her fellow sisters, her gaze resolute. We've all been tested today. This is only the beginning. But as long as we hold fast to our faith and to each other, there is nothing we cannot overcome. For the Emperor, and for our fallen, we will endure. Adelais was the first to agree, standing as a grin began to warm the coldness of the day from her cheeks. For the Emperor, and for our fallen, we will endure. I like it. That roused a crooked grin from Nilestra, and she bumped her shoulder against Silverstein's. Didn't know you were a hospitaller and a poet. As the weight of uncertainty lifted from their shoulders, the novitiates let out a collective sigh and shared a few exhausted chuckles. The once heavy atmosphere now buzzed with renewed determination and camaraderie. They leaned in closer, drawing courage and resolve from the warmth of each other's company. Adelais sent a small prayer of thanks to the Emperor for granting them this moment of peace. But that peace, unfortunately, was broken by the sound of the barracks door groaning open. Sister Charity stepped inside, her face grim, her posture rigid, still clad in her blessed ceramide. A moment before Adelais, and by the looks of it, the rest of the novitiates scrambled to stand at attention, Charity blurted, "At ease." Then, more quietly, "At ease." Her voice was tight with fatigue and strain. "I know you are all exhausted and in need of rest, but I'm afraid there is still work to be done in the days to come." "What are your orders, Sister Superior?" Adelais asked. It was the safest question that came to mind. Charity fixed Adelais with a pointed look, as if weighing her resolve. Then she sighed, rubbing a gauntleted hand over her face. "The investigation into today's attack is already underway. Canoness Agathella has already considered calling upon the Inquisition to get involved. Despite all at ease, Uncomfortable shifts and nervous murmurs rippled through the 9 girls. The Imperial Inquisition. Adelais felt a shiver run down her spine as she recalled the fearsome reputation of the Emperor's most relentless agents. She had never encountered an Inquisitor before, but the stories were enough to inspire both awe and dread.
"Permission to ask a question, Sister Superior?"
said Maury. "Granted." Adelais and the others turned, looking at Maury in anticipation.
"Is there reason to suspect this was more than a quarrel that simply escalated among the faithful?"
Charity hesitated before answering, her gaze distant. "There are suspicions of outside interference. While we have no definitive proof, it's best to investigate all possibilities." "Outside interference?" Ebony echoed, her brow furrowed in concern. "From whom?" "That's what we intend to uncover, or pray the Inquisition can do in our stead," Charity responded, her voice stiff at another mention of an Inquisitor getting involved. "But until we know more, I urge you all to be vigilant and continue your duties with diligence and devotion." The room fell silent as the weight of their leader's words sank in, and it remained so as Charity continued. "I need each of you to write a full report of everything you saw and experienced during the battle. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it may seem. The Inquisition will demand a thorough accounting."
Yes, Sister Superior,"
the novitiates chorused, their voices subdued but resolute. "And one more thing," Charity added, her gaze sweeping over them. "The pilgrims you escorted here are to remain under constant watch. They must not leave the convent grounds under any circumstances, and their interactions with others are to be strictly monitored and logged. Am I understood?" Adelais frowned slightly, puzzled by the orders.
"Sister Superior, do you suspect the pilgrims of some wrongdoing?"
Charity's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Adelais thought she might either answer her question or reprimand her for even asking. "All of you, get to work on those reports. Use the librarium if you must, but the longer you wait, the harder it is to recall potentially important details. I want them on my desk by first light." With that, Charity turned on her heel and strode out of the barracks, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Once the door to her private chamber closed, several of the girls let out the breaths they'd been holding. Adelais glanced around at her sisters, seeing her own weariness and uncertainty mirrored in their faces. They split up, some heading to the librarium, while others remained in the barracks to write their accounts. Adelais joined the former, settling at a scribe's desk and pulling out the necessary writing materials. The seat was made of old, creaky wood and was terribly unkind to the bruises on the backs of her legs. A blank parchment and quill pen lay before her. Around her, several of her fellow novitiates did the same. The only sounds were the scratching of nibs on paper and the occasional yawn or muttered prayer. She stared at the parchment, her mind muddled as she tried to organize her weary thoughts and memories into a coherent narrative. Where should she even begin? How could she put into words the horror, the carnage, the gut-wrenching loss they had experienced? Unbidden, the image of Sister Liana's broken body flashed before Adelai's eyes, and she shuddered. Her hand shook as she dipped the quill into the ink pot and began to write. "I, Novitiate Adelais de Scene, submit this account of the events that transpired on..." The words came slowly at first, halting and uncertain. But as she wrote, the memories began to flow more freely, spilling onto the page with a scritch, scritch, scratch of the ink-stained quill tip. She described the sudden call to arms, the frantic rush to aid Kill Team 4, and the cacophony of violence that had greeted them in Sector 15. She recounted the desperate struggle against the rioters, the terror and adrenaline that had fueled her actions, the sickening crunch of bones breaking under her blows, the hot spatter of blood on her face, the choked screams of the dying. Every visceral detail etched itself onto the parchment like a scar. Then, Adelais came to the moment she had dreaded. One moment, Charity had her back to her, and in the next, she'd drawn her bolt pistol, aimed, and expertly missed the novitiate's head, striking the target behind. Adelai's quill hovered over the parchment, her hand trembling as she struggled to find the right words. How could she possibly describe that moment? The split second when she believed her own superior was about to end her life, only to realize that Charity had saved her from an attacker she hadn't even seen. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath to steady herself. The memory was so vivid, so raw.
She could still feel the rush of air as the bolt round whizzed past her ear, hear the wet thud of the heretic's body hitting the ground behind her. Opening her eyes, Adelais stared down at the half-written report. She knew she should include every detail, leave nothing out. That was what Charity had ordered, what the Inquisition would demand. And yet... Adelais glanced around the librarium. Her sisters were absorbed in their own reports, quills scratching furiously against parchment. None of them seemed to be struggling like she was. With a quiet sigh, Adelais dipped her quill in ink once more and began to write. During the height of the battle, Sister Superior Charity demonstrated exceptional skill and awareness. Her swift action neutralized a threat I had failed to notice, saving my life in the process. It wasn't a lie, Adelais reminded herself. Yet, as she left out certain details and carefully crafted her words, she couldn't help but feel guilty. Was this truly enough? She prayed, not for the first time that night, that it would be. The Bones We Bury is an unofficial Adeptus Sororitas story created by Ray Berry, voiced by Claire Glover, composed by Joseph Bagwell, edited by Saran Meeks and Rachel Luxford. The supplemental setting of the Luetin Necropolis was conceived by the content creator, Luetin09. Warhammer 40K is a registered trademark owned by Games Workshop Limited. All rights to the Warhammer 40K universe and its associated elements belong to the Games Workshop Limited. The Bones We Bury is a labor of love and creativity for entertainment purposes only. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.